I was forwarded something that you're quietly, you talked about quietly taking action. You've been sending, so you've been a man of your word. You've been sending corporate leaders something you're calling the 2% solution. Maybe you can explain that. It seems like, listen, the idea of reparations, you see being bandied around, and you seem to have a private sector solution for that.
Yes, and I, just to articulate it quickly, if you think about, what is the biggest challenge, and there are many challenges in America, but nowhere is structural racism more apparent than in corporate America. And in the case of, and I'll walk through a couple of industries, or at least one industry, the deprivation of capital is one of the areas that creates a major problem to the enablement in African-American communities, Latinx communities, et cetera. And I think when you think about, the idea of reparative, restorative, and regenerative capital, how do you do that? How do you do it effectively? Well, as we were working to re-architect what I'll call the ability to deliver the payroll protection loans through the CARES Act, and enabling a lot of our community development financial institutions and minority-owned banks to deliver capital into these communities, we discovered a few things. One is, that structural racism in the financial services community. There's about 4,700 banks in America. Only 21% only 21 are Black-owned, and they have less than $5 billion in assets. And the total amount of assets in the U.S. commercial banks is $20 trillion. So if you think about structural racism and access to capital, and 70% of African-American communities don't even have a branch bank of any type in those communities, we said, well, why don't we think about how do we address it? Well, one of the first things to do is put capital into those branch banks to lend to these small businesses to actually create an opportunity set. And so if you look at, top 10 banks, $970 billion over the last 10 years of net income. What if you took 2% a year from every one of those banks and said, let's drive that 2% into call it the regenerative activity of these CDFIs and MDIs, these small, I call them capillary banks. What effect could that be? Well, there's a number of things that happen. One, it drives, this into the communities. It drives it into these small businesses, which employ 60+% of African Americans anyway, these small businesses. And the average American family gives away 2%. Of course, our Giving Pledge members give away a lot more than that. But, 2% feels like the right number, but you do it over 10 years, 2% a year of net income. You can do it through a foundation so that you get, some tax benefits across that. But you use that to not only enable a capital infusion into the banking systems and the businesses, but you also have those banks adopt and provide technical assistance and enablement assistance to help those banks actually build more capacity. Those banks don't bank those communities. And so part of me is, all right, here's your responsibility to become more thinking about stakeholder capitalism as opposed to shareholder capitalism. And you can do that across multiple industries. You can do it in healthcare. You can do it in financial services. You can do it in sports. And I think that's the solution. So what I'm in the process of doing is working
Are you talking about
go
allocations?
ahead, yeah.
Are you talking about allocations or donations?
It can be both. If you think about it, you can actually donate it to a foundation that actually now drives it into tier one capital effectively in the financial services industry. So there's different ways to do it. Some we can go direct into the industry. You have to have a place to receive it. But there's food deserts in these same communities. Well, fine, let's look at the biggest, if it's the, Walmarts and Amazons and Whole Foods, say, okay, let's think about corporate responsibility into those communities to drive more effective distribution of high quality food, high quality, low cost foods in those same communities. But that's corporations taking that level of responsibility. So I've been, socializing this with members of the Business Roundtable, World Economic Forum, church leaders, private equity titans, our philanthropic friends in the Giving Pledge, et cetera, youth groups, and a number of our call it social activists, to see if we can build the right sort of coalition to say this is the right thing to do. And the federal government can play a part in this, but I think we need to have the whole community of business leaders now step up and say, let's do our part.
And do you see this as a public pledge kind of thing, or just something that you do because it's the right thing to do and you do it quietly, but you do it?
I think you do it, but I think if we get the right leaders in each of the industries, they will take pride in what they are doing. They will inspire their other industry, call it competitors, to do the exact same thing. I hope there will be a competition ultimately amongst them to say, let's drive this. Who can create the most efficient way to drive their industry expertise, capital, and revitalization capital into each of the industries in these communities? I think that will show Americans there is hope. There is an opportunity for the American dream to now be revitalized, and frankly, give us all confidence that we can actually make this a better country and a better place to live.
And it could be good business because these are underserved markets, and these are people who historically pay back their loans at a higher rate than the average.
You got it. The actual default rate in those communities is actually lower than the FDIC. And, we've had the group of McKinsey working with us, and they said, listen, if you actually activate the wealth and income of the African-American community to the average in the white American community, it increases our GDP by $1.5 trillion a year. Now think about that, right? So that's a dynamic, that's a payback that creates an economic sustainable engine.